betcha. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the, what's today, June 20th, Housing, Land Use, Environment, and Transportation Committee meeting. If you all please would silence your phones, we'd appreciate that. We'll open this meeting and call it to order. Peggy, is it okay if we just introduce going across and you take roll that way? So we'll start with our Parks Director, Mr. Don Rocha.
Don Rocha, Director of Parks and Recreation Department.
Good morning, Joe Zintek, Director of the Consumer and Environmental Protection Agency.
I'm Harry Freitas, Roads and Airports Department Director.
Jacqueline Anshano, Director of Planning and Development.
Mike Wasserman, D1 Supervisor.
Joe Simidian, County Supervisor.
Sylvia Gallegos, Deputy County Executive.
Steve Mitra, Assistant County Counsel.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 2, which is public comment, where anyone can speak about anything not on today's agenda. We ask that you fill out a yellow card, as I just saw the lady there deposit one, and drop it off. Peggy, we're doing a drop off here in front instead of the back, correct? All up front. Okay, so what everybody's doing is perfect. So if you want to speak, fill out a card, put the number you want to speak, and you'll be recognized. And is that on public comment or number 4? Number 4. Okay, so public comment. Scott Largent, come on down. You know the system. You'll have up to 3 minutes, and if anybody else here wishes to speak about anything not on today's agenda, now's time to fill out a card. Otherwise, when Scott's done, we are going to move on to the next item.
Mess up here, I'm sorry. Ready when you are, Peggy. Thank you. Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. Scott Largent. Recently, I was reading that we're no longer going to be prosecuting people over minor drug possession charges. That kind of threw me off guard right there. I was wondering why would the county do something like that? I understand they're trying to go more through like a therapeutic level of getting people treatment and help. The way I see it is that we cannot make money off of those people with that drug charge. There's no, they can't pay the fees, they can't pay the fines, you know, we're providing an attorney, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I think what we're doing now is, even though we put them through these programs, we're going to then start to, like we're already doing, excessively bill out the mentally ill and homeless. I know I come in here a lot talking about this, but it's not getting any better. It's getting really bad everywhere I go, downtown, light rail tracks. It's an absolute war zone. I try calling county services to get people help. No one shows up. I hand out these flyers to everybody downtown. I say, look, these are the numbers. This is what I see our county working on. These are the meetings I go to. I sit out there with packets, information, explain it to officers. Nobody from the county shows up. What we're doing in Santa Clara County is we are excessively billing the mentally ill and homeless, okay? At a health and hospitals meeting one time, it's probably about 9 months ago, Ken Yeager was just all giddy up there, the fact that we had billed out the state for $154 million over 6 months of mental health services, which that number kind of threw me back a little bit. And everybody on the dais up there was all excited that this money was rolling in. And I went up to comment and I said, well, this is great, you're billing all these people out, but what about the ones that are not in that dragnet? What about the ones outside of that? And it was kind of a stupid question, because over time I realized what exactly was happening. I don't think our county is doing a very good job with anybody out there that's suffering right now. Our creeks are absolutely full of people. Zombies go up and down the streets downtown. And then now the thing with the warrant situation, that we no longer bring people in unless it's $15,000 worth of warrants. So that person would be smoking meth, punching somebody in the face, dropping a deuce in the park right there, and they're right at the level right there where they're not going to take them in. They've got to get another $5,000 over that. And it actually has to be all committed in the one central crime area right there, that one crime. So if it's kind of mixed up, if the person beat somebody up in the morning, then got caught smoking meth when the cops finally came out there, we're not going to take them in either. So I'm very concerned that this is not panning out right now. In our diversionary dragnet programs, they don't really help people. This is outdated literature. This did not help me. And you got a guy they hired off of Craigslist to go in there for minimum wage. He'd never done drugs. He absolutely didn't understand anything. And it was a failed program. This is absolutely outdated stuff. And we need to really give some people some actual help. Drug treatment. Stop filling it out through mental health. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the only card we have for item number 2, which is public comment. So we'll move on to item 3, which is consent calendar. Currently on the consent calendar, Supervisor Simidian, is items 9 through 13. Do you have a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you, and I'll second that, Peggy, so that passes unanimously. That's to approve items 9 through 13. I don't have a speaker card from anyone on any of those items, so we'll consider those items handled. We now move on to item number 4, receive and report from the Department of Planning and Development relating to development density and potential build-out within Stanford University San Juan Residential Subdivision District and the formation of an advisory committee for the area. And we will turn to Jack Onciano, our Director, Department of Planning and Development.
Thank you. Good morning. Jacqueline Onciano, Director of Planning and Development. The item before you is a report from the Department of Planning and Development relating to the development of residential density and potential build-out of the Stanford University San Juan Residential Subdivision District, along with the formation of an advisory committee. This item was a referral from the originally presented at the April 18th Hewlett meeting with a request for the department to come back with information and a timeline on work plan for the preparation of surveys for the potential revised development standards for the San Juan district. We have presented a timeline in the staff report relative to the preparation of historic documents relative to the housing in the San Juan district, the formation of an advisory committee, and I'll just speak briefly to what we're thinking. We have some surveys that have been submitted by Stanford relative to some of the residences in this San Juan district. We need to evaluate those surveys in conjunction with acquiring additional surveys because not all of the residences were identified or analyzed. We would secure a consultant, an independent consultant, to do that historic analysis. And then we would evaluate the historic character of the areas and consider the potential or proposed zoning designations for these areas based on those analyses. We think it's very important to have an advisory committee, and that advisory committee would be developed with stakeholders, and the stakeholders we're thinking of are leaseholders of the San Juan Residential District, of course Stanford staff, and then other stakeholders that would be that have given us interest. And that assembly group, that advisory group, we think should be assembled first. They would be a part of the process of the analysis throughout the 6 to 9 months that we believe it's going to take to actually do proper analysis of the area, and then we would make recommendations. The recommendations would go to the Planning Commission and then to the board. And so we recommend that this happen after the GUP. We are currently in the process of analyzing and presenting to the Planning Commission the general use permit for the Stanford development, and we believe that this process should follow that, the completion of that process. And with that, this concludes staff's presentation. If you have any questions, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Before I do that, if it's okay with you, Supervisor, I've got 4 speaker cards. I'll call all 4 of you up. Come up in whatever order. Whoever gets there first, speak first. Please identify yourself. There's a microphone built into the podium. Christy Holloway, Marvina White, Jessica Von Bork, and Carol Wu. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Christy Holloway, and I am a resident of the Stanford University residential area and have been for 40 years. And I'm here representing a coalition of homeowners, about 200 people. And I believe you have a letter from our attorneys that's already been delivered to you. First of all, I want to thank you very much for your attention to the issues that we have raised. And we're very gratified with that, and the staff reports certainly reflects the major items that we have asked for, and we hope that they will continue to move forward. Some things that we would suggest are that perhaps this historic survey could start as soon as possible. It is an important piece of information for giving the county staff the opportunity to view change in context. And it's a piece of information that's been missing for a long time, and we think it's very important. We are very gratified also to see the residential zoning standards revisited, and that for each one of the neighborhoods that have special characteristics that need to be preserved. The Citizens Advisory, again, we're very pleased to see that moving forward, and we would like to see as broad representation from various neighborhoods, age groups, and tenure of faculty so that it feels really fair and open and inclusive. Thank you very much for your consideration. It has been an interesting process, and we look forward to seeing it to conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on up.
Good morning. I am Marvina White. I live on the Stanford campus, have lived there for about 20-something years. I'm a part of the SCRL, which is an elected body on campus, but I'm not speaking for SCRL. I'm just speaking for myself as a homeowner. I would like to ask the board to consider giving more time to us. I'm not quite sure about the timeline. It sounds like things are moving pretty quickly. The Stanford homeowners, there are two language issues I guess I'd like to deal with. One of them is the confusion around the use of San Juan residential subdivision, which for us on campus usually means the old part of campus. Many people on campus are not clear on the fact that what you're doing is having an effect on all of us. There are about 900 plus residences on campus. The Stanford Homeowners Group represents one portion of our group. While I agree with many of the things that the homeowners are talking about, I also think that my voice hasn't been heard loudly enough. I think we need time to consider getting the voices of all people who are going to be impacted by something like historic preservation or rezoning. And I don't think our voices have been heard loudly enough. Maybe we've been confused, maybe we've been a little bit distracted, but I really think it's important for you to consider that there are a large number of voices you are not hearing, and it would be wonderful if you could. It would also be good if you could help us to make clear what the subdivision is and what it isn't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Carol Ruth, and I've been a Stanford homeowner for the past 20 years. And I am here on behalf of several hundred homeowners who are concerned about maintaining the character of our neighborhoods. We have, in the past, notified all 900 people on campus and asked for input, and several hundred have really stepped up and answered that call. So we are trying to include everyone as much as possible. I want to thank the committee again for addressing the issues concerned, the issues of concern raised by Stanford homeowners, and the committee's willingness to address the solutions outlined in your report. Since research for the historical survey and zoning issues outlined in your report is a time-consuming process, it'll take more than a year to complete, it looks like. I would respectfully request that no new permits for additional infill projects or new buildings applied for by Stanford be approved for our neighborhood until the county has completed its historic survey and reviewed the zoning and established the advisory committee. I would also request that Stanford not be allowed to use current or future infill projects in the San Juan district neighborhoods to count towards their required housing unit for 2020 GUP. The university states that it plans no new development in our neighborhoods in the new GUP, and therefore we request that any units developed in our neighborhood by Stanford be excluded from the total units required under the new GUP negotiations. We would like to see the historic survey start as soon as possible and to provide much needed historical context for the future development of our neighborhoods, and we would welcome the implementation of zoning that reflects and recognizes the neighborhood's unique characters. Thank you again for your consideration and all of the hard work that you have engaged in on our behalf. Thanks again.
This is the last speaker we have on item 4. Just so if you want to speak, please submit a card. Otherwise, this will conclude our public comment portion.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Von Bork. I'm the Director of Land Use at Stanford University. We appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today. Stanford greatly values our faculty neighborhoods and cares about compatibility and good design. We also believe finding appropriate opportunities for additional faculty housing is an important goal, and we believe that these two are quite compatible. Regarding staff's recommendation to Hewlett today, we would first like to say that we really appreciate being included as a stakeholder in the proposed advisory group and also being part of that process. Thank you for that. The county's historic preservation ordinance addresses historic resources in the San Juan residential district with an existing set of historic preservation regulations that apply to residences on Stanford's campus. Initiating a historic survey beyond these existing regulations has many implications that may not be fully understood by faculty homeowners. We believe we may all benefit from a review of other examples of what these types of surveys mean from a regulatory perspective. Before the survey is initiated, please provide an opportunity for the entire residential district population to engage and gain a comprehensive understanding of what a historic survey may imply and what issues it is intended to address that are not already part of the existing ordinance. In terms of the other work plan items identified by staff, we, together with the Stanford community members, believe a robust noticing and participation by the whole community is appropriate. Stanford asks that the county administration conduct public outreach commensurate with its own outreach policies regarding land use amendments by hosting one or more meetings with the residents of more than 900 homes in the San Juan residential district prior to appointment of the advisory group and prior to commencement of any studies. I did notice in the staff report that the public outreach is listed as item number 4 and will only be engaged if any considerations are made to zoning. It should be first, please. Thank you.
Peggy, will you let me know if that's regarding number 4? Five, thank you. That concludes the public comment portion of item number 4. Supervisor Simidian.
Thank you. Forgive me here. I want to check my notes. Ms. Anshano, let me first say thank you to you and your team for responding to the requests from the committee before. I think we're slowly but steadily getting to the right place and a good path, and thank you for that. I've got some thoughts I want to share, but first I just want to clarify a couple of things. On the issue of the historic survey, and I think it'd be helpful to clarify the distinction between the ordinance that was referenced and a survey, because they're two very different things and they have different implications. And I'll mention why I think that's important in a minute or two. The other piece of it, as you're looking for your microphone button there, is the staff materials indicate that portions of the campus have already been subject to a survey and portions have not. So if you can clarify that, that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline Anshano. So the difference first between a survey and an ordinance. An ordinance defines what is required when you're conducting a survey, what would be included. The survey itself is when we have a structure that you have a historian come in and do the analysis, and that analysis could include who's lived in the property, who the architect was on the development of the property, the age that the home was actually developed, the style of the home. And let me see, you asked one other question, Supervisor Simidian.
Well, portions of the campus have been subject to a survey, I gather, and portions have not.
Yes, we have. Stanford actually analyzed some of the structures on the property and some on the Stanford campus and has submitted documentation to the department relative to certain structures on the Stanford campus.
but I gather from the staff enclosure that has not taken place in the San Juan district, as we refer to that district, which I think has something like 10 neighborhoods totaling 800 to 900 homes.
That is correct. What happens is when an application comes into the department for a demolition of a piece of property or a structure, based on the age of that structure, we require a historic assessment. And so it's individual when we're processing a building permit of some type. It's not that they came in and did a historic assessment on every residence within that district.
So the suggestion here from staff is the preparation of an historic survey which affects the San Juan district, which includes the multiplicity of neighborhoods, including the San Juan neighborhood, but not limited to the San Juan neighborhood.
That's correct. We do have a map that we had attached.
I've got the map, so I just want to make sure that I was connecting the dots in terms of what the map shows and what the proposal is, and I think I've got it straight. Thank you. That's a helpful clarification, at least for me. I asked this question at a prior meeting, but I want to ask it again because I think it's important to keep reinforcing this. The survey itself does or does not have any impact in terms of what people can or can't do with their homes?
It can influence a proposal depending on what the survey yields. If, for example, if the survey were to yield that a particular structure was built, or the architect on the particular structure was a famous architect, I'll take Julia Moore or someone like that, then we take a step back relative to if you're demolishing a residence, what does that mean? Because you're losing potentially you could be losing a resource. So it does inform the decision.
Could you tell us more about what that means? And I'm going to be very direct here. We've got folks, and I'm not in a position to who are clearly creating some sense of anxiety or even fear among folks in this area that if we do the survey, that it will have adverse consequences in terms of their property rights. I think we need to be candid about what the impacts of a survey are, but frankly, I'm not inclined to delay doing the survey so that folks can go out and perpetuate a misunderstanding or even a misrepresentation of what a survey entails. So I want to be very clear before we make any decisions as a county. What does a survey entail and what are the implications of the survey? And so I want to ask you a little bit more about that in terms of what the survey does or doesn't provide.
So the survey is meant to be an informative document. It, depending on what information is yielded out of that survey, will depend on what's recommended. So even though you might have a structure that was designed by a famous architect, we have to look at the existing condition of the house, see if it was compromised in any way, and if that's the case, if there was some compromise over the years in additions or remodels or something of that nature, it could be, there could be a different outcome. It could be that the unit is allowed to be demolished. It could be that we say, no, it's preserved. It could yield that it's the proper terminology is a good example of some particular type of architecture or something like that. So it's meant to be an informative document. It's not a directive. It depends on what is yielded from the information as to which way it's utilized.
Yeah, I guess my view on this subject with respect to historic heritage is this is one of those times when ignorance is not bliss, where, none of us should be afraid of actually knowing what's there on the ground and then having a discussion about what should or shouldn't happen that's based on solid evidence in the process. Is there any reason why the historic survey couldn't be done sooner rather than later?
We could embark on it in a more timely fashion. It still is. We still wouldn't be to a place where we're analyzing like what should be demolished, what should stay. It's still going to be an informative document.
I actually think that doing it when you're not in that circumstance might be a better environment.
Okay.
And I take to heart the exhortation of both the university and the residents who've spoken of the importance of having community outreach. And I want to come back to that in a minute, Mr. Chairman. But I do think that the survey is something that it would be hard. Mr. Wasserman, you always tease me when I talk about sidewalk office hours, but it would be hard to explain to somebody at sidewalk office hours, why did you do a survey on the rest of the campus, but you didn't do a survey on this particular piece? And so I think doing the survey on this particular piece is both appropriate and important. And Ms. Anchano, just to underscore it, among the many factors that can be considered in such a designation in a historic heritage context, you mentioned who's lived in the property. So it's yes, it's about the property, yes, it's about the structure, but it's also about the living history of the property over years past, yes?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. On the outreach front, you talked about the creation of such a committee. I think the general outlines are sensible, and I guess the question would be, when you talk about it being time limited, I think, and we've talked about this previously, do you have some notion of what that time limit looks like or how long it should exist? And part of where I'm headed, just to preview this for you, is I'm wondering, candidly, I think it's hard to know when issues will or won't flare up, how long issues will or won't take. So I'm thinking that maybe putting some time limit on the existence of a body at the front end, but then subject to an extension at the request of either the board or the director might be a way to give us a little bit of flexibility there while still conveying that the goal is for this not to be a never-ending exercise for people. I'm curious about your thoughts in that regard.
That we're certainly open to that. We discussed having an advisory committee that would remain in existence. We talked about two different types of advisory committees. One that was helping with and was a part of the process of the historic survey review, the development of the zoning guidelines, along with, of course, the other stakeholders. But then we also discussed having an actual advisory committee so that the neighbors were informed consistently when projects were coming through. So we had a discussion about two different advisory committees because we know there's a time-limited one that we need to develop for the development of the zoning designations for the property. But then we had a conversation about having an advisory committee that would stay in existence with a Stanford representative so that when projects were coming through, the community was actually informed and did not hear about a project coming through. Although the survey and all of the zoning would be done, they still would have some knowledge of us processing a project through in that area.
Is it, and I understand that in many of these cases, the answer may be haven't had a chance to think that far ahead and it's kind of hypothetical, but is it you're thinking that perhaps the first committee would morph into the second committee, or is that these really are two very different committees?
We believe they were two different committees.
Okay. And the difference, again, in the composition in your judgment of who ought to be on the first committee and who ought to be on the second committee was what?
Well, we hadn't got that far, okay. Other than what we outlined here on page 3 of 5, where it was the leaseholders within this district, Stanford University, and then other stakeholders. We've received requests from other associations that have some authorities in these districts that they wanted to be participants as well.
The group you're describing now is the group that would be advisory and or resource group in connection with the consideration about possible rezoning. Is that correct?
That's correct. Okay. And that's a much larger group.
Got it. And then the question yet to be addressed, let alone resolved, is and then what comes next after that in terms of some kind of advisory body.
That's correct.
And let me just ask, and Mr. Wasserman, I know you've got experience with the San Martin Neighborhood Alliance. Does that group vote and make recommendations, or do they just serve as a resource?
They serve as a resource, but they often do take votes. They're not binding. It's not like SIMPAC, San Martin Plan and Advisory Committee. The Neighborhood Association is exactly that.
And then for SIMPAC, do they take votes?
So SIMPAC does, and Jacqueline, please correct me if I'm wrong. SIMPAC does take votes. That's the San Martin Plan and Advisory Committee. They meet the day before the Planning Commission does. They meet on items that are specific to San Martin and give their recommendation and opinion on, I believe, a Wednesday that then goes to the Planning Commission on a Thursday.
Right.
So it's kind of an advisory to the Planning Commission, local advisory.
Yeah.
But those are different. The San Martin Neighborhood Association is a neighborhood association, a community group, not unlike the San Martin Chamber of Commerce, another group. But the SIMPAC is an actual staff documented, minutes taken and referred to the plan forwarded on to our county planning commission.
Ms. Anchano, I'm thinking, I mean, we're looking, I think, at something more like a SIMPAC here than and I'm guessing I'll get a smile or two on this, but I'm asking myself if there's a way to depoliticize the process, and I'm not sure I actually think that it would be the best use of such a group on the Stanford campus to ask them to take votes and to have I don't know if it's a 10-member group, have a 6-4 vote. I'm really more anxious just to make sure that there is a venue where people can be heard, be informed, communicate to and through that process to our board and our planning commission. But I worry that it gets turned into quasi-political body in a way that's not only sort of unrelated to those goals, but almost in some ways antithetical to those goals. So thoughts?
If I may, there is the ability to develop a land use advisory committee for the district, where they would be a recommending body. There's no politics involved, and that's really important because you never want to pin neighbor against neighbor. They would just be a recommending body to.
But when you say recommending, does that to me, and I may just be misunderstanding the use of the word, that to me sounds like somebody takes a vote and says we're voting 6-4 to recommend the following.
That's true. You do want to have a situation where at least understanding that they're just recommending, they have no approval authority, that their time is being recognized as important. So at least it has a consideration that's coming forward. You don't want them to spend that time and then they're not in a position to just make recommendations. When they recommend, still the hearing authority, whoever that is, are just considering those recommendations. So that's the way that you give importance to what has been recommended and consideration. But it's just a thought. We could go back and look at some options and bring them back to Hewlett just on the advisory committee, that's that second tier committee for what happens next, for the committee to consider. We could just present some options to you. So you could consider them.
I'd like to ask through the chair that we explore those possibilities. I think whoever it is we're hearing from, whether it's the folks we've heard from today or at prior meetings, particularly in this environment, I think it's probably true anywhere, but particularly in this environment, there are, as your staff report indicates, a range of stakeholders. And, if we turn this into a situation where everybody's jockeying for a seat at the table because they want to be represented, you're going to have a pretty big table. And you may also struggle, as I think we have with other groups, to attract people who will participate, stay involved, and then keep showing up. I think if we think of this more as a forum or a venue in which to make sure everybody gets heard by the planning staff, and where everybody who wants to be informed can be informed, and where we make sure as well that it's not just the planning staff, but that whatever they've shared makes its way up to and through our Planning Commission and our Board of Supervisors. I mean, I know enough about this particular area to know, there'll be some folks who say, well, why is the university seated at the table when they're the applicant, quote unquote? Now, my view is the university has a perspective that it's important for us to hear and to understand. That's very different than talking about, how many votes do they get in some representative, quote unquote, body. Same with Stanford campus residential leaseholders. On the one hand, you've got folks who are here today speaking on behalf of that group. On the other hand, we've had folks from the Homeowners Association who said that's not working as well as we think it could or should for us to communicate, to which Stanford campus residential leaseholders has responded. Don't forget that there are other people who may not share the view. And again, if you're back into a situation where you're saying, well, we're going to give these people 2 votes and these people 3 votes, I think it gets dicey in a hurry. If, on the other hand, what you're saying is, you know what, these are all legitimate points of view, we want to make sure they get heard and considered, I think that's a very healthy thing. And I understand that you have to let people engage enough so they feel like it's worth their time and effort, and that it's not just a gab fest. But I do, as I say, worry that all of a sudden it gets pretty charged. And the other problem is once people vote 6-4 to either do something or not do something, then frankly it becomes harder for the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors, because the folks are going to say, well, we voted. Why did you have us vote if you weren't going to listen to us, quote unquote? And of course, listening to people and agreeing with their conclusion is a different thing, and the board has its responsibility and the Planning Commission has its responsibility, just as the staff has its professional responsibility. Enough on that.
Then I'll toss in my
Please.
2 cents while you're breaking between subjects. In Los Gatos, I went through the Almond Grove Historical District and how that was formed and determined, where the lines were, what streets, and the Broadway Historical District. Jack, I read in the first paragraph here about the formation of an advisory committee, and I think that's your goal. The agenda items described as a receive report, but you're obviously getting some direction there. We've all been in this game long enough to know you go and form an advisory committee. You recommended leasehold on page 3 here of the package, but leaseholders from San Juan, Stanford staff, other community members, et cetera. No matter where you draw the line, somebody's going to feel left out. No matter where you draw the line, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, my vote should count more than the other person. They have a bigger interest in it. There is no perfect way. The San Martin Neighborhood Association is exactly that. It's a group of interested neighbors that wanted to meet and discuss various items that pertain directly to their community, which is called San Martin. It's simply a name given to an unincorporated area, like Stanford. I joke with my old chief of staff. He's from Almaden. That's a community. It's San Jose. But at the end of the day, it's concerned individuals that want to have a voice, want to be heard, and want to learn, and want to share information about what's going on in their community. So as I looked at this item number 4, the idea was for you to find a consultant, for you to form an advisory committee for the area. I say, God bless you, good luck. Put together as many as you can. Obviously, when something gets too big, it's unwieldy, and if you have a vote, well, it's 13 to 12, let's do this. What does that really mean? At the end of the day, whatever's being formed is an advisory committee that will simply bring back a recommendation after convening public meetings to solicit input and information. The consultant that you hire, I've been through a lot of those. You hire a consultant, they come back and say, this one is historic and is as is. This one was historic and has been modified. So if they want to add on or demolish, and you look at each thing, each application separately. It's a big task to get done. Once it is done, it has a long life. It's useful for every application that comes forward, learning about the community. I have the same thing going on in New Almaden. And believe me, and I'm just pointing out here to Stanford people and to residents, New Almaden, which by the way is older than Almaden, so the name always cracks me up. But New Almaden, I've attended many community meetings there, and people get up and they talk about the historical nature of their so-and-so and so-and-so, and one neighbor yells at the other neighbor and says, "You're not actually historic, I am, so your vote doesn't count." And they are neighbors. But a house has been modified in some way. A house has been demolished in some way. This is all getting into the weeds. This will not be fun or enjoyable. It will be informative, and then you'll have something from which to base future decisions on as far as developments or modifications. Supervisor, as far as I'm concerned, what staff is recommending as far as getting the historical consultant, coming back to us with the makeup of what an advisory committee looks like for the area, I think makes sense to me. I'm excited, Jack, about creating a vehicle in which the various bodies, Stanford, the neighbors, you're going to have people come speak there that don't live in your neighborhood, but think their voice counts as much as your voice does. It's going to be frustrating. It's a process. I've been through several. But when it's all done, some document or protocol or method will exist to rely on going forward, and it won't be perfect. Anything else on this particular item, Supervisor?
Yes, and I'm going to ask for your patience, Mr. Chairman, because I think we're kind of at the time when we need to figure out where we're headed. It was my impression from the staff report, Ms. Anshano, that this was something that the staff was simply going to move forward on and did not need to go forward to our full board for formal action. Did I get that part right?
That's correct.
Great, thank you. With respect to the body that we're talking about, you're talking about creating and or bodies if there are two successive ones. One of the other benefits of not having a formal voting process may be that if it becomes too formal, it may become a Brown Act body, which is appropriate and desirable in many instances, as in a committee like this. But if you're really trying to engage the neighborhood in a more organic and formal way, then I think that's a tough one. So I actually think there might be some added benefit to keeping it a little bit more informal. Informal does not mean unimportant. It just means that it's a slightly different structure. Ms. Anshano, since I'm getting a look from the chair that you'd like me to try and move this along a little bit, can we move forward on the historic survey sooner rather than later?
We'll certainly do that,
Okay.
yes.
Then, and the notion, because I think you clarified this a little bit, but there apparently was some lack of clarity on the part of some folks who read the earlier staff report. The notion, the evaluation of existing neighborhood design will in part be informed by the creation of such a group before that happens. As I looked at your list that I saw as being sequential, the group gets pulled together before and becomes part of that exercise, not after the fact. Yes.
That's correct.
Thanks.
But if I can clarify, they would not direct the historic survey. The group is not going to direct what's in that historic survey. We would secure an independent consultant to do that analysis.
I understand and agree. Okay. And I was also talking about the consideration of the new development standards and zoning as well. And again, that group will it will come into existence prior to that happening. And I think that's consistent with the desire that, somewhat differently perhaps, but I mean, the university said outreach sooner rather than later. Great, yes. The group can be part of that outreach sooner rather than later.
Yes.
And some of the residents have said survey sooner rather than later, and I think those are things that can be done together. I understand the desire to return on some of this after the GUP process is complete. I'm sympathetic with that, understanding the bandwidth issues, if nothing else in your department. That being said, if for any reason the GUP process drags on still longer than any of us hope, I think we do need to be committed to moving forward with this exercise. And I think that will help you keep faith with folks in the community. So if you can, if I could ask you through the chair to think that one through and come up with a timeline that perhaps exists notwithstanding any changes in the GUP timeline, I think that would be helpful as well. There were some issues that were raised in the various letters, and Mr. Chairman, we're not going to get them solved today, but I do want to highlight them. There is this back and forth debate, Ms. Anshano, about the argument that some homeowners make that they are in effect compelled to live with limitations on their property by virtue of their lease with the university, that the university is then not obliged to live with as it redevelops properties in the same neighborhood. I think that is an issue that I just want to call out and ask you to take a look at and have an opinion about, because I think it's one that has come up in prior meetings as well. There is similarly a concern that's been raised about making sure that the work that we're doing on the GUP and the work that you're looking at here is in sync as to whether or not future housing development in the San Juan district, that's the all 10 neighborhoods that we're talking about, counts towards any housing goals on the campus. And because I think folks have suggested we don't want to inadvertently or unintentionally incentivize development in locations that were not highlighted for development as part of the GUP process. I would ask that you make sure that issue gets addressed in the conversations as well.
Okay.
There were a couple of folks who specifically, just so you know that we read your letters, universities, and arrived this morning, but we got it just so you know it's there. Thank you. Who suggested that there be some low-density neighborhoods that where 2 or 4 units per acre might be the appropriate number of units as compared or contrasted with the 8 that's currently in place. I'm going to say something that I hope pleases you, Ms. Anshano, which is I don't have an opinion about that today, but I do think it's an important issue that should be looked at, and I understand that's why you're going through the review, is to figure out whether or not you think such zoning is an appropriate recommendation at the staff level, and so that ultimately that policy decision can be made by our board. But I wanted to make sure that those issues were raised as well. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to ask that we simply receive the report today, but I think we do need to bring this back one more time, and I don't have an opinion about which meeting that should be, so I'll simply move that we receive the report on item number 4
and it come back,
and then come back to our committee at some point later this year, which is pretty wide-ranging.
And if I may, when we come back, I'll address the timing of the historic survey. I just want to clarify, I want to go back and just make sure that the funding source is secure. And then we'll come back on the 2 different advisory committees.
Yeah, and before we leave this item, I wonder if I could ask Ms. Von Bork to come back up. I have a quick question to ask through the chair.
Yep.
And Ms. Von Bork, if you want to say you'll get back to us, I certainly will understand. Sure. But we did get the exhortation from you and the university in the letter that community outreach needs to be a thing, and as I say, I think that's actually consistent with what folks in the homeowners group are saying. Does that mean that we could count on the university to provide a venue or a space where I might come and meet with the people on the campus, and or where we might bring planning staff to meet with people on the campus, and that your office would be willing to accommodate that?
Certainly.
That was all I wanted to ask. Thanks a lot.
All right, that concludes item number 4. We'll move on to item 5, which Jacqueline's going to lead off again. But Jacqueline, we have a speaker card on this from Michael Bloomquist.
Okay.
I don't have any other speaker cards on 5, so Mr. Bloomquist, come on forward. You'll have 2 minutes to speak on this item. And this is regarding public notification and access to code enforcement violations and case information.
Good afternoon. We have a property that's next to San Jose Water Company's water tanks. There were a number of issues that were circumvented. It looks like the water company had basically perpetrated fraud, said that they were exempt from land use hearings because they were under CPUC's exclusive jurisdiction. There was no hearings for a use permit, there was no ASA, and there was no design review. The tank ended up getting built on our recorded road. The replacement road or paving they did was deficient. It was only about 15 to 20 feet wide, and it's in an area of very high fire hazard severity zone, a state responsibility area, and it's my understanding the water company receives a bunch of money from state taxpayers for enforcing fire safety in those areas. Without a recorded right-of-way, we can't get conventional financing, building site approval, and everything else. While all of this was going on, we were remodeling the home and also obtained a certificate of compliance for an adjacent lot. And with that, we received or obtained a tree removal permit for 13 enormous eucalyptus trees. We were in the process of trying to stump grind those stumps. That wasn't working out, and I ended up, there was a guy that was redoing the streets down in Los Gatos, hired him to come up and take the stumps out. The first few stumps came out fine. It was no big deal. He also had a bunch of extra dirt that was to be used that he said, I'll work out a deal for you if you'll take this dirt. We're going to use the dirt, refill the stump, and then we ended up getting a grading violation. The grading violation was supposed to go before the Planning Commission. Instead, there was all sorts of crazy things that happened, and to me, it's a criminal violation, Penal Code 146 Subdivision B. If there's any way we can get that appealed before the Planning Commission where it should be without having to go to legal action.
Thank you. That concludes our public comments on item number 5. We'll now move on. Jacqueline, you've got a brief report on this, and then I've got some questions.
Yes. This was a referral for public notification and access to code enforcement violation case information, and James Stevens is our code enforcement program manager, and we have a brief presentation for the Hewlett Committee on this item. James Stevens.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Chairman Wasserman, Supervisor Smidian, committee members. Good morning. My name is James Stevens, Code Enforcement Program Manager. Sitting beside me is County Counsel Michael Rossi. The item before you is a referral regarding public notification and access to code enforcement violation information. At the April 18th, 2019 Hewlett Committee meeting.
I apologize for the interruption. I think both the public and the committee members, at least this committee member, are having trouble because your computer is blocking your access to your microphone.
Just bring it a little closer.
Sounds good. Better?
That's better.
Much better.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Trying to have too much bass, so sorry. The item before you is a referral regarding public notification and access to code enforcement violation information. At the April 18th Hewlett Committee meeting, the committee requested the department return to the June 20 Hewlett Committee meeting with additional information regarding 1, further definition of environmental impact, 2, use of interested parties list for notifications, and 3, the inclusion of proposed procedures within the board policy manual. At this time, the department suggests that it publicly notice cases involving a serious environmental impact, which would be defined as violations that impact a sensitive natural resource, habitat, including wetlands, watercourses, and riparian zones. B, include the use of hazardous materials or chemicals. Or C, violations that create a major slope instability in hillsides, or that could cause massive erosion or landslides.
Excuse me, James, did you say serious and violent impact? Was your second word violent? What did I miss?
Environmental.
Environmental.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir.
Oh, I've got serious and violent on the mind. Go figure. Serious and environmental.
So, yes.
Thank you.
Little side note, long-time listener, first-time presenter, so please forgive me if I stuttered through this a little bit.
No, that's
all right.
My fault on that one.
Okay. So this definition distinguishes code violations that have more serious impact on the natural environment and that may require joint enforcement efforts, including other regulatory agencies, including U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Regional Water Quality Board, and others, or could have lasting broader impacts upon the environment and that could affect the surrounding community. As it relates to the use of existing notifications for public outreach, the department currently, for several large projects such as Stanford and Lehigh Permanente, the department maintains a notification list of interested parties who have asked to be notified of county actions and activities related to the property. The department is currently able to use these lists for notification of code enforcement violations that occur on or near these sites. In addition to these lists, the department is evaluating the development of additional opt-in tools to easily allow the public to subscribe to notification lists regarding violations on certain properties using a web-based service. The department is investigating if this type of service that is used in other jurisdictions and is sometimes referred as a 311 system can be integrated into the Insight permit platform being used by the department. A 311 system would allow county residents to report violations and access information about existing matters through a smartphone application, the county's website, or a dedicated telephone number. This system would provide easier community access to information about code enforcement efforts and could additionally be used by other county enforcement departments for a similar purpose. One of the many advantages of this system is that residents would not need to subscribe to a particular list, but could have real-time access to any property records in which they were interested. And 3, as it relates to the board policy manual, although in the staff report the department recommended the policy be adopted by the board and maintained by the department, consistent with other similar policies like early public outreach and other outreach policies, concerning outreach conduct by the department, upon further consideration, staff is recommending that the policy be codified in the board manual policy and that the department will post the policy on its website so the public can easily find it. At this time, that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that. I've got some questions. Supervisor Smitty.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, through the chair, I think we're there, so thank you and thank you. I do have some clarifying questions to make sure that when I say we're there, that we're in the there that I'm hoping and thinking we're there. But I do want to say thank you because I think this is important. And for consumer and environmental protection, I just want to make sure they get engaged in the conversation. I'm sitting here looking at my SCC Dine Out app, and I can pull up any food service establishment anywhere in the county, and I can get access to what are public records through that application. So I would just encourage you to have a little conversation back and forth with your colleagues about what's worked for them, what hasn't. I don't live under the delusion that everyone in the room has the app on their phone or that they access it, but here's what I do think. I think that
but
when
they
people,
should.
Well, I would never be even that directive, but I do think that if we've got thousands of food service operators who know that every single one of their records is available at the touch, that they're going to care a little bit more about making sure that there isn't information there that reflects poorly on their establishment. Because there's some stuff in here that you don't want to read before you go out to eat. I'll just tell you that, okay? So back to this notice of violation process, there are a couple of questions I want to ask. So we've added the environmental degradation, but we've defined and described it. And part of the challenge here, Ms. Sunshine, is that in an effort to keep the report brief, we've got just the pieces for today without sort of connecting them a little bit to the last time around. And so forgive me if I'm going back and forth. But environmental impact has been added. There's a definition of environmental impact. Let me just ask, would there be any problem? It says the department suggests that public and notice cases involving a seriously environmental impact, which could be defined as code violations that, and my question is it any one of those or does it have to be all three of those? That's the first question.
It is any one of those.
If we could just be clearer about that, that would be great. Then on the third one, C, looking at page 2 of 4 or packet page 11, create major slope instability in hillsides that could cause massive erosion and landslide. Could we say create major slope instability in hillsides that could cause significant erosion or landslide? Is there any reason why that's not? Massive, I'm wondering if anybody's ever going to acknowledge that anything was massive. But significant erosion or landslide, if the staff, Ms. Anshano, thinks that's language.
I have no issue with that.
Thank you. And then I just want to be crystal clear about the fact that even if none of the criteria that are identified are met, that where there is an existing notification list, we will provide notice of the violation to the folks on the list.
Absolutely.
So no matter how minor, if there's a notice violation. Okay, thank you. That's helpful as well. Then on the issue of where the policy lives, so to speak, I think staff recommendation is a wise one in terms of making sure that it's a formal board policy, but that it also sort of lives at the planning department. And I just want to make sure that it says the department suggests that proposed policies be adopted by the board, but maintained by the department. What does that word maintained mean? I like it. I just don't know for sure what it means.
If I may, through the chair, we have on our website a policy location, and we actually took a snapshot of that so we could show you where our policies live, and they are easily accessible by the public. So we wanted to house them on that policy page so that it could be easily accessed by the public.
Got it. Thank you. I think that's a wise path, and I think it's the best of both worlds. So thank you for that. Last question is, we had a notice of violation, I think, recently was it at Lehigh again within the last week or two?
That's correct.
There is a, I'm just curious, there is a notification list for public outreach there. Did we send this out to people on that list or not because we don't have a policy in place yet?
I don't believe that it went out to, I'm not sure on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was the latter.
It did not go out yet because we don't have a policy in place. Okay. Thank you. That just helps me make the case for why we need the policy. So thank you. Mr. Chairman, if you would like to move this along, is this the time for me to say I am prepared to move receipt and forward to the full board with the clarifications and amendments as noted, if that's, and I see
plus my 3 questions.
Pleasure, 3 questions, which,
thank you. So thank you for answering what exactly is the violation, serious environmental impacts. I appreciate that. The questions I've got are specifically, when is it put online? So, for instance, charges are brought, complaint is filed, investigation is done, a person is red tagged, cited, and this may be for you, Michael, as well, but then they appeal it. So is it posted online with appeal pending? Is it not posted until the appeal and the issue is resolved? Is it posted when the investigation is concluded by the department and a determination has been made that it's a significant landslide? What point in the process is it publicly noticed that John Smith at 123 Tate is in violation?
I think I'll take this. I believe that the posting that we have is when the notice of violation is issued out, because that's when the investigation has been completed and we're documenting that violation.
Okay, and then if it's appealed, then is the public notice on the website you referenced updated where it says violation appealed, hearing to be at this date, send comments to here? What do we do for the next stop when it's being appealed?
Typically what's being appealed are fines and citations. So we don't typically get people appealing the notice of violation. So as you outlined the process, complaint comes in, we go out, we confirm the violation, prepare the notice of violation. That notice of violation would be posted probably simultaneously or shortly thereafter the mailing to the responsible parties.
Okay.
As bandwidth permits, staffing levels.
Okay, and then when the issue is resolved could be new information comes in and something, for whatever reason, it's determined it's not a violation. It could be determined it's a violation and then mitigation is required and mitigation occurs. They graded a hole without permission, they filled the hole, you go back out and say, all done fine. When is it removed from the public notification?
We would remove it once we can confirm the violation has been abated.
Okay, so that's basically it's as soon as possible?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
But it's those kinds of guarantees because sometimes what my concern goes back a lot to do with jails and when people are arrested. Many people are arrested, small percentage are convicted or charged even. There's that whole process. And I just wanted to make sure whatever homeowner this was, when they are arrested, investigated, whatever that may be, when they're actually cited is when you're telling me it will go on there, on the public record.
That's right.
And then it may be determined for whatever reason this was inappropriate or not needed, or the person mitigates, pays the fine. okay, for instance, refills the hole, that kind of thing. I just wanted to make sure that people's rights are protected, both being exposed to their neighbors and the public as being a violator of some sort, and also it being removed once they've paid their penance or done whatever's necessary.
If I may,
Please.
We had conversation when this previously was before Hewlett that there was a request for us to just inform if it was in progress, to say in progress, if it was closed or resolved, to have that information. And if my memory serves me correctly, we discussed just keeping them up for a period of time so the public could just look on the website and see if it was still in progress or if it had been closed or resolved.
Okay.
And so that was a conversation that we had at Hewlett about how to inform the public without them having to call staff.
What I'd be
relative to
looking
those
for would be
cases.
timely posting and timely unposting. Just that it's timely on fair on both sides.
If I may,
yes,
I'm not sure our current system has that capability of that additional language. I think it may just be able to do in progress or closed. I don't think it has that capability currently.
okay. I'm just asking when we know there's a violation and there's concern from the public that it gets posted properly, not unlike what SEPA does with restaurants. And if a person's got a yellow tag and they resolve things, then they get a green tag. But that history and stuff is there. I just want to be timely on both ends.
Okay, thank you.
That's all. Thank you. And my last question is, are there any other counties that currently do this?
That post notice violations?
Yes, that we can model from, or I just hadn't seen anything in the report making reference to that.
You know, let me look into that. I'm not quite sure off the top of my head.
Okay, okay, thank you. That's all I've got, Supervisor, and I appreciate that information.
Let me give some clarification to that answer. The actual posting of the notice of violation, I can't answer. But as I alluded to in the presentation, several jurisdictions, including my former employer, the city of Palo Alto, use this 311 system. And it's a very useful tool. An individual can open up this program, it'll open up like Google Map. And you can, if you have a planning question, if you have a building question, if you have a code enforcement question, you click on that module, you type in your address, a little pin pops up, and it tells you the exact process in which that case, that application or permit is at in the process.
Interesting. In San Jose, when individuals have issues with homeless people on their properties, they call 311.
Yes.
And a division of the San Jose Police Department that's trained in that and to provide services responds. So when I heard you say 311, I was thinking something entirely different. So thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And Peggy, I'm fine moving this forward unanimously, as Supervisor Simidian had said previously. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 6. Jacqueline, also comes under you, and it's the use of RVs as accessory dwelling units. I was inclined to hold this item to the August meeting and have some further communications with your office, and I think there was some other desire to do that too.
Okay.
But Supervisor Simidian did mention that he would like to hear a brief report on this item where things are now, if we may.
Okay, if I may, I wanted to not be remiss in acknowledging Mr. Blumquist. We are aware of your violation, and if you will see James Stevens, he's going out the door there. Relative to your violation, Mr. Blumquist has been, and I just wanted to acknowledge you, sir. He has been inquiring with our department about how to resolve his issue. And so, Mr. Blumquist, if you would go with James, we'll attend to your inquiry where we can. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Through the chair, but
Yes.
I think I can move this along and forestall the need for presentation today. I was not on the committee when this request was made. I see the staff report. I am generally sympathetic with the view or in concert with the view that the staff has provided. However, it raised for me a conversation that's popped up in my office on a handful of occasions that I think Supervisor Wasserman may have confronted as well, which is it does seem to me that in ag settings, so not what we're talking about here. I got that. I read it. I know that that's not what we're talking about. in ag set, I mean, I got all the arguments about why, an RV is not an ADU, and I'm for the most part sympathetic. But in ag settings, on more than one occasion now, I've been confronted by folks who say, look, I've got 20 acres, 50 acres, 100 acres, and I just need somebody on the property to kind of be providing oversight, and it's just not a practical solution to say we're going to build a house there to have somebody who's basically a worker on the site. And the costs associated with permitting a, quote, mobile home type structure, a double wide, a single wide, end up being, prohibitive as well. So what I would be interested in, Mr. Chairman, if you're open to it, is I don't need to go through this today. If you want to bring it back, I'm yes, of course happy to do that. But I'd kind of like to have some discussion about a much more modest kind of pilot, which is, couldn't we tell people who are in ag settings you can have one mobile home or RV on your site? And, is it the perfect solution? No. Does it have some problems? I'm sure it does. But at some point, we got to get a little practical here. And we keep saying that we're concerned about the housing shortage. And we keep saying that we want to facilitate the preservation of ag lands and working lands in our county. And yet, we're kind of not coming up with as many creative possibilities for how we could easily facilitate that. And I'm saying literally, if you could just say pilot project 25, 50, or 100 RVs slash modular structures on ag lands under certain circumstances, just one, that might alleviate some enforcement challenges that you're currently dealing with, I know.
Thank you. And Jacqueline, before you respond to that, there's the whole migrant farm worker housing that we have that has different limits that's allowed by right. My brother-in-law on their ranch, they have migrant farm workers that come in that are seasonal. They also have a dozen employees that are there on the ranch year-round all the time, 10, 20, 30 years working the ranch. Yes. So when you do bring this back, if you could address that question as far as the individual people who are there managing the ranch full-time all year, every year, versus the migrant. Also, in this particular item, it talked about 200 parcels in the East Foothills. And what I'd like addressed by your staff when it comes back is if we did anything with this, the precedent that would set, where if we say yes to 200 parcels in the East Foothills, then clearly San Martin's going to come forward with a similar issue. So in your boxes that you have advantages, I like how you did that, advantages and challenges rather than advantages and disadvantages. That was a good word, challenges. I think the challenges are well stated. There were 5 of the bulleted points under challenges where I saw them as things that your staff has added in that I hadn't thought about. But for instance, and I'll just end with this, under the challenges box, challenges column on page 2, the first bullet, where it says a challenge would be infrastructure cost, septic water unknown for each unit, but may still be. For myself, as a person who's done development in the past, I would not list that as a challenge because that's up to the individual property owner. Whether they want to spend $1,000 or $10,000, whatever, bringing water and sewer, that's on them. What we're trying to do here is enable or say no, that you can do this, and this is how it must be done. And if one person finds the cost prohibitive and another person doesn't, that's on them. So there's a few items, there's 1, 2, 3, there's 4 bullets in that column. I'd be happy to go over with you at a later point where I think those are not under our purview as the government agency making the rules. It's up to the particular homeowner.
Okay.
That's all. It's just minutia.
Okay. And if I may, I have a draft of the ag worker housing ordinance that has been submitted for my review. And so staff is currently looking at alleviating the need for ag housing because we do have an ordinance that we're drafting. I have a copy of it and have made comments, and we'll meet with staff next week. The other issue that I don't want to say it as an issue. The other thought that we had relative to affordable housing is we have situations where these manufactured units, they can range from 500 square feet up to 1,200 square feet that can be already approved by our building department, plan check, and they can be located on properties depending on the size of that lot up to a certain acreage easily as a manufactured, like we call them like tiny homes. We were discussing this, our staff, how we could make that process easy where they could get a unit on the property, you know, right away in a very simple format to accommodate housing. So that's something we'll bring back when you refer this back as you direct us.
Thank you. And I share Supervisor Simidian's feeling that it's my desire to provide a way, a path for farm owners to allow housing of some sort, temporary and or permanent, on their facility. And again, it all depends on the size of the property. And when you say, you know, temporary housing, there's a big difference between 4 and 400, and allowed by right versus needing a permit, but still allowed. So I too want us to go in that direction where we find ways to allow farm and ranch owners to provide housing for the people that work their property on both a seasonal and a full-time basis.
May I say,
Thank you.
one of the challenges that we're having is there's a mixing of issues. We want to address the housing issue, but it's kind of morphed into something more. When they put the housing on, then they are asking for like a tourist stay, like to be able to rent it out off season for what we consider a farm stay when you're preserving ag. But we really have to take a step back. If we're just going to deal with the housing issue, we're trying not to bleed in the economics of how they sustain the ag. We want to deal with the housing part, keeping in mind that they may use that housing for something different, but we're discussing, does that information really belong in an ordinance when you're talking about ag housing?
Thank you. I'll go out on a limb and say that Supervisor Simidian and I agree that we are not talking about creating housing for tourist purposes.
Thank you.
Is that fair, Supervisor Simidian?
That's fair.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Largent, come on forward for item number 6 if you're still there.
Before we call on Mr. Largent, if I could ask him to pause for just a moment, because I don't want to lose a couple of trains of thought here. I appreciated very much the distinction that Supervisor Wasserman made between what I'll call larger scale farm labor housing and the issue that I raised. And I just want to make sure for staff they understood the issue that I raised is a very narrow, small one. Doesn't mean it's always an easy one, but it's a very narrow, small one. And, you know, I've had it happen at least 3 times now where people have shown up in my office saying, look, I'm just trying to figure out a way for my guy to stay on the property and take care of the property for me, because by definition, it's in a more remote location. There needs to be a way to do this without constructing a 2,000 square foot stick-built home. And I was struck, the one thing that I was struck by in the staff report was that apparently we do allow people to live in these circumstances when there's a property under construction for as long as 2 years after the building permit's been issued. So, you know, that's not, in my judgment, particularly temporary. That's a long-term stay. So it can be done. We've been allowing it. And what I'm looking for, as I say, is a sort of a quick, easy way to say, you know, consistent with public health, safety, and welfare. I get all that. But, you know, let's find a way. I actually did farm labor housing work in the 80s over in Half Moon Bay, and there's a project over there now that's got a couple hundred units, and it makes me smile every time I think about it for the little role I was able to play. But that's a very different challenge than just saying, for God's sakes, can we get a foreman out there on the property who can just stay put in a way that's safe but affordable and relatively hassle-free. And that's what I was looking for. And then as long as we're asking for help from staff on this issue, Mr. Wasserman, if we could also get an off-agenda report on our ADU requirements with respect to differences for properties that are owner-occupied, primary property, or not owner-occupied. I've been approached by folks who are saying, hey, you're limiting the ability to have ADUs even in areas where they would otherwise be allowed by telling people that they have to be owner-occupied primary residences. And I'm sure there's been a conversation about that. I've just not been privy to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So much more to come. Thank you. Mr. Largent.
Thank you, Scott Largent. I was reading the report in the back. I know we're talking about the agricultural end of things for housing on farmland.
Yes.
I did notice in the back it was also talking about safe parking programs for RVs too. I'm not sure how we're tying this all in. When I lived up in, when my business kind of went through a downturn, I ended up moving up to Angels Camp area, and I stayed up there. My ex's mom had a property up there. They had one of those metal fabricated buildings, good-sized warehouse, and I was able to put a fifth wheel back behind there. It was an overhang. It was a nice fifth wheel. It was a place I could hunker down for about 2 years and survive. It was inexpensive. My ex's mom made a little extra side money. I thought it was a good thing. So what you're talking about right now, Mike, I think would be a good idea for people to have another option. And then maybe some of these farmlands or maybe county lands farther out that they would like to get permitted where we could put more RVs for people like myself that are sober, that are clean, that are trying to put their lives back together, but it's really hard to get things back together around here. Just me getting into an apartment, putting everything back together has damn near killed me. I barely eat because I'm spending all my money on rent. So it just makes it very difficult if we had something like that. And do we have, I mean, I've been looking more at the land we have. I'm sure we have parcels out in, your neck of the woods out there, Mike, that I don't know why we don't do that. I don't know why we don't put inexpensive trailers, even the double wides. When they do 2 double wides, I've watched this, I've looked at this on YouTube. They put an awning overhang in the center of it, so they space these things out, and it has kind of like a patio area, and it doesn't look like the ghetto double wides that are stacked everywhere. It doesn't look like that. But we need more options right now, and I wish we would do that for more people that are going through recovery, because I really don't think these people are ever going to be able to really maintain their lives after sobriety. It's way too hard here. It's very, very difficult. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 7, to receive the annual report from the Department of Planning and Development relating to the status of the county's Surface Mining and Reclamation Act program.
Before you move to that item, I think I missed, you're referring the previous item back, but you didn't set a date that we come back on the RVs.
Oh, we just knew you would come back as soon as you possibly could.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
In August.
Good morning, respected supervisors, staff, and members of the public. My name is Manira Sandhir. I'm a principal planner with the Planning Department. This item before you today is the annual update on the status of the 6 quarries that are located within the unincorporated county. Quarries are regulated under the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, also known as SMARA. And I have with me here Senior Planner Rob Salisbury and also our Program Manager for SMARA, who will provide some key highlights from this past year.
Thank you, Manira. Supervisor Wasserman, Supervisor Smidian, members of the committee. My name is Robert Salisbury. I'm a Senior Planner with the Department of Planning and Development. The county currently has 6 quarries, 3 of which are actively producing material, 2 of which have ceased production and are undergoing reclamation, and 1 which is currently idle. The staff report provides information on all 6. At the pleasure of the committee, I will cover the highlights of 2 of these quarries and then answer any questions that the committee may have. The 2 quarries with significant issues during the reporting period are Lehigh Quarry and Stevens Creek Quarry, both located west of the city of Cupertino. To start with, Lehigh Quarry, it's by far the largest quarry in the county. It was inspected last year as part of the regular SMARA inspection process. And during that inspection, the county observed a new haul road between Lehigh and Stevens Creek Quarry for the purposes of the transport of aggregate material from Lehigh to Stevens Creek Quarry for processing. The county issued a notice of violation, and the transport of this material has ceased. As part of this notice of violation, Lehigh Quarry was directed to apply for a reclamation plan amendment to include the haul road and some other disturbed areas within the reclamation that were then outside of the reclamation plan boundary. This reclamation plan amendment has been submitted and is currently incomplete. In addition to this reclamation plan amendment that was in response to this notice of violation that the county issued, Lehigh also submitted a comprehensive reclamation plan amendment, which would totally replace the approved 2012 reclamation plan. Among other changes, it would open up a new mining area to the south and to the west of the main quarry pit. It would leave the West Material Storage area in place and would rely on the importation of clean fill from Bay Area construction projects as a source of needed reclamation material. This application is currently undergoing review by the department. I would also like to mention, even though this occurred outside of the reporting period, that the department issued another notice of violation to Lehigh Quarry related to the deposition of sediment into Permanente Creek. This appears to be occurring as a result of slope instability below the West Material Storage area, and this notice of violation directs Lehigh to investigate this apparent instability and provide recommendations as how to address it. The other quarry that I would like to mention specifically is Stevens Creek Quarry. This quarry was also inspected last year as part of the regular SMAR inspection program. And they were also issued a notice of violation related to the importation and processing of material from Lehigh Quarry. This notice of violation and the resultant compliance agreement directed Stevens Creek Quarry to apply for a use permit and reclamation plan amendment pre-application by May 31st, 2019. This pre-application has been submitted and is currently under review by the department. The last item that I would like to mention, within the report there is discussion of Kirtner Quarry, the sole idle mine within the county. And the report notes that the department requested an increase in their surety bond as a result in the increase of their financial assurance cost estimate. And the report noted that the increase had not been submitted. I would like to confirm that the operator did in fact increase their surety bond as directed, and the county has received documentation verifying this.
Excuse the interruption, through the chair. From what to what, if you can tell us?
It was a minor change, a difference of about $10,000. Okay. But I would just like to confirm that the operator did comply as directed to increase that surety bond. And again, we have documentation now verifying this.
And if I may, through the chair, we actually Lehigh Hansen submitted a letter to us showing the face and the amount. The estimate was at $56,899,005, and the face reference is now $54 million. I'm reading at the bottom of that. It's currently $54,657,484.
That's the Lehigh, and you were talking about Kirtner, though?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay, I'm
No,
sorry.
I want to make sure I didn't, because we have 6 different sites here. Okay, thank you. Thank you. No, thank you both. It's helpful.
So that concludes my presentation, but of course I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Manira. Thank you, Rob. This is a received report only. Did you have any further questions? We have no speakers on this item.
Thank you. So just to be clear on Kirtner, they were supposed to increase their financial assurances, and they now have.
That is correct.
Okay. Then on Lehigh, we've got an application for a reclamation plan amendment, but it has been deemed incomplete thus far.
We have 2 separate reclamation plan amendments in process for Lehigh. The first one was submitted at the direction of the department to bring disturbed areas, including the Hall Road, within their reclamation plan boundary, and then necessarily propose reclamation of those areas. That is the application that is currently incomplete.
Excuse the interruption, and that's the one that goes back to what I'm going to call the road dispute.
Correct.
Okay. Then, meanwhile, on a somewhat larger stage, we have this other application, and that's the one for a new pit, which necessitates a new reclamation plan as well, yes?
It certainly necessitates a reclamation plan amendment, correct, because they're opening up a new mining area, and they need to show how they're going to reclaim that mining area.
Well, they've requested to open up a new mining area.
Right.
That's currently under review.
And do we know if that application is complete yet?
It's still under review. We haven't
that's
completed
what-
our review
okay,
on that.
So under review is planning language for not yet deemed complete.
That is correct.
Thank you. So then, I guess my question is, sort of, do we have a sense for the timeline on, and I understand you can't, speak for how long the applicant will take, but do we have some kind of a timeline on how long it might be before either or both of those are deemed complete? And then perhaps most importantly, what happens once they are complete? And I know we've had a little talk about this before, but these are going to be big issues.
If I may, the completeness of one is due by tomorrow. The application that's currently under review, we have to get that information out, whether we're deeming it complete or incomplete, by Friday of this week, the 21st.
Okay. So the first one, Ms. Anshana, was the road issue, and that's one where we have told them what we need, and we're expecting to get where we've told them we need it back by tomorrow. Is that, did I get that?
If I may, Rob, what is the date that they have to return information on the first one, the road?
They have, by our ordinance, they have they have 6 months to submit an application without having to pay an application reactivation fee. And they have a full year to actually submit a resubmittal that answers the incomplete items.
Okay.
If they exceed that time limit, then their application is void, and they would need to reapply.
And forgive me, I know you've answered this at least twice, but I'm just trying to process the different stages. On the larger set of issues, which are under review, was there a determination at some point that that was deemed incomplete, or we've not even had that initial determination yet?
It's still under review right now. We haven't made a determination on that project.
So it could theoretically be deemed complete, or it could be deemed incomplete, and the applicant could have more time to then complete the application.
Yes.
On the bigger one.
That's
Okay,
a
great.
possibility.
And then once we've got the complete applications, what happens then?
We would commence preparation of an environmental impact report due to the significant issues that are being raised by their proposed reclamation plan.
Got it. So now I'm back at sidewalk office hours again with my friend Mr. Wasserman, and somebody walks up and says, now, all right, I heard it just got deemed complete. What's going to happen and how long is it going to take? So the answer is there's an application. Staff's going to have to review it. There's going to be an environmental assessment. And once all that gets done, staff will forward its recommendation to the Planning Commission, and that's likely to take how long on a project of that magnitude?
If I may, and you can correct me if I misspeak, okay? It depends, because we have to secure an EIR consultant. That has to be a fair process. Of course, we have EIR consultants that do SMARA. And then we have to review the document that's prepared. So we're probably looking at anywhere from a year or more, plus 2 years, maybe 3 years.
Okay. So the chances of this thing going to the Planning Commission in the next year are close to zero, even if it was declared a complete application tomorrow after it had been reviewed. And then it probably, in fact, would take a year to 3 years for that process to be fully conducted and before it gets to the Planning Commission. And I'm not asking for commitments. I'm just trying to figure out where's the $5 in the office pool going to go. And the answer is more than a year, less, but hopefully not as long as 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I can also explain, we have 2 separate applications right now, and we're looking at we're evaluating the 2 separate applications. Lehigh has submitted the one where it's kind of a combination of how they're trying to move forward. Although we have 2 separate applications, they've submitted one of the applications, the one that we're currently reviewing, as if the first application is blended in. So
the first application being the roads?
The road,
okay.
That's correct.
Thanks, okay.
Okay.
And then once it got to the Planning Commission, it would be heard by the Planning Commission, and they would make a, quote, decision/recommendation. And would that be final at the Planning Commission if everybody loved the result, and only come to the board if there was an appeal?
That's correct.
Okay. And And then thank you for the information about the most recent notice of violation at Lehigh. What are the implications of the violation was, as I understood it, for dumping sediment in the waterway? Is that the short, non-technical version? No?
Yeah, that is accurate, yes.
No, it's not accurate. It's not dumping. It's sloughing off. They didn't dump sediment. It's the sloughing off of sediment into Permanente Creek. I'm sorry. We just want to be very
Not
careful.
massive, but it's significant. Is what okay.
We just want to be very careful.
No. I think that's a very important point. So
I'm sorry, Rob.
No, the Director Anshanu is exactly correct. I don't believe that it was a deliberate dumping or disposal of sediment into a creek. It was a result of apparent slope instability causing sloughing of material that then made its way into the creek.
Okay, and that's a bad thing because why?
Because it indicates a larger slope instability potentially of the slopes beneath the West Material Storage area.
Okay, so it has potential ramification to be indicative of additional slope instability. But then let me press again and say, so when there's sediment that lands in the creek, that's a bad thing. Why?
Because it increases turbidity and has impacts to water quality.
Turbidity again is?
Solids dissolved and within the
crap
water
in the water.
itself. Crap, yes.
Okay, there's another planning term for you today. Okay, and that's bad because why?
It has impacts both to water quality and also the habitat. Any critter that's trying to live in the water, typically they don't like a lot of dissolved solids.
Got it. So thank you. That's helpful. And so in terms of remediating that, what has to happen and what's the timeline for remediating it?
We have directed them to provide sort of both a short-term and a long-term plan. Short-term plan would be what erosion control measures, the best management practices, silt fences, wattles, that type of thing that they need to put in place to prevent this sediment deposit. And then longer term, they need to evaluate that slope and then come up with a plan or a solution that would address, hopefully in the long term, this apparent slope instability.
Got it. I'm ready to move on to Stevens Creek.
I thought you were going to say it was a slippery slope.
Another planning term. Stevens Creek, my understanding is that they've been operating without a valid use permit for the last 5 years.
That is correct.
Okay. When do we say we're done with that?
I think we've given them a compliance agreement, and they have made the first significant step in following that compliance agreement, and that they submitted a pre-application for a new use permit.
I'm concerned that they're just shining us on. So how do I make sure that that doesn't happen?
I think we could come back and report to this committee at your pleasure on the status, but I would say that based on our current review, they have made a reasonable effort to provide information on their new reclamation plan and the difference in their operation that they're proposing through that use permit. So
if I could get Ms. Anshano to second you, hand you over to me for an afternoon at sidewalk office hours, and there was a member of my constituency, a member of the public standing there, and I said to him, this is the guy from planning, and he's going to tell you why we've had them operating without a permit for 5 years. You or Director Anshano, who's leaning in to try and rescue you from this question, I think, somebody, would say what? Because I'm quite serious now. That it's a little hard for me to explain to people why an operation of this magnitude is operating for 5 years without a permit. And I know and appreciate the department's desire to help people get into compliance, and certainly with individual residents or smaller operations. But this is a professional operation. It's not a small use. So 5 years without a permit.
If I may jump in here, Manira Sandhi, Principal Planner. I believe the quarry also has a mediated agreement to operate on one of the parcels that are there. And we also have a compliance agreement in place with the quarry that sets timelines on when they have to obtain a use permit by.
And that time limit is now when?
I'm not quite certain. We'll have to look into it and we can report back.
I think that we're going to have to, if you would desire for us, through the chair, excuse me, if you would desire for us to bring back this specific information on Stanford, we would be happy to come. I mean, on Stevens Creek Quarry.
All the
sorry.
good stuff's in my district, Ms. Unshine. So.
We would be happy to come back with the specifics, but and I'm not rescuing staff, just clarifying that we didn't bring information specific for these two projects, but we're happy to come back.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mindful of the hour, and I think what I'd like to do is ask if we get a report back specifically on Stevens Creek, but today. No. It doesn't have to be the next meeting, but this year. At the earliest opportunity this year would be my request. Want to provide flexibility to the staff, but I also don't want it to go forever. And then I think one of the benefits of getting this annual report is it tees up a sort of a overarching question, which is, can we be a little more rigorous about expecting compliance? When we had the Lehigh conversation here a few months back, it very quickly crystallized. We got folks who are living in close proximity to a major industrial use. You got the folks at the major industrial use saying, hey, we're important to the economy, both in terms of the jobs we provide and the product. You got the folks sitting next door who are saying, thanks, but that's not helping us much with the long list of things that we're concerned about. So we're in a tough spot. We have a job to do. I don't envy you having that job to do. But again, I do think we're, as the county gets denser and denser, we're going to have more and more people. We're going to have to sort of say, you know what, we have an expectation that the rules will be followed and not just let things go with assurances, because I do think we're getting shined on a little in some of these cases, and that's just not an acceptable outcome. So is there something we can talk about today, or would you like to bring that back as a sort of a specific response at a subsequent meeting as well?
And my suggestion would be the compliance agreement that you've mitigated, arbitrated, signed on both sides, be brought back at the next meeting, and perhaps we can sunshine that, and that should hopefully address.
Yeah, and my office and I can do some work off agenda with you on that, but I'm looking at this larger issue as well as like, okay, it's the benefit of having all 6 of these here and sort of seeing where we've been and knowing the history that my office and I have had over the last 6.5 years on Lehigh, plus 20 years ago when I was here the first time around. It's like, look, let's settle on some reasonable rules, understand the tough balance that we're all trying to manage, but then once we've settled on those rules, expect everybody to comply with those rules, because that allows us then to turn to the public and say, those are the rules we've settled on. I may or may not have been supportive of the reclamation plan and the vested rights decisions that were made by the board before I got here, but I do turn to the public and say, that's the hand I got dealt, that's the hand you got dealt when I arrived here, those are the rules of the road, fine. But then once we get the rules of the road, really do need to people. So we could ask for a sort of a separate report back, and it does or doesn't have to be the same day. That doesn't tell me. Thank you.
And for clarification, Supervisor, through the chair, do you desire for us to come back on both Lehigh and Stevens Creek? I would highly suggest that because they are related.
If you find it easiest, I'm going to defer to your judgment on that, Madam Director.
Thank you.
Super. Thank you both very much. Did not have any speaker cards on that item. As I mentioned earlier, we move on to item 8, which is the last item of today's agenda. As all subsequent agenda items were handled previously under consent, I don't have any speaker cards on item number 8. And Susan. Welcome. And the recommended action here is for us to receive a report relating to your office and regarding the landscape inventory and operational area needs assessment.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, or almost afternoon. Good morning, actually. Chairman Wasserman, Supervisor Simidian, members of the committee, Susan Gilbert Miller, Director, Office of Sustainability. To my left, I have from the Office of Sustainability IPM program, Chris Curry, who is a Senior Program Management Analyst. And yes, as you rightly say, the recommendation is to receive this report on the Facilities and Fleet Department's Landscape Inventory and Operational Needs Assessment. The assessment reviewed 35 facilities and fleet sites and estimated the cost of maintaining the current sites, but also transitioning conventional sites to sustainable landscaping. The assessment found that the County sustainable landscaping programs will require additional resources and that staff will require additional training to realize the many benefits that sustainability can provide to landscapes, such as using less water, less energy, less chemical treatments, and then also increasing species habitat, water, and air protection. So we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you for the report as well. I do not have any questions on your item. Supervisor Smithian. There you go.
Oh,
We'll
Thank you.
We'll take that as a motion, Peggy, and I'll second to receive the report. Thank you all very much. And it
Thank
still
you very
is a good
much.
morning.
And before you step away, thank you for the work. I don't think this is particularly glamorous work. I don't think you get a lot of really appreciate that sustainability going on out there. But you know, these are the kinds of things that when the next drought rolls around, we're going to be glad that we've taken these steps, and we're going to be thinking we should have said thank you when we were taking them. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
And you're not finished either as we add facility after facility. Hard to keep up with. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you very much.
All right, and like I said, we handled 9 through 13 through consent prior, so unless there's any more comments from committee members, seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting to August 15th at 10 o'clock in these chambers. Thank you all very much. Have a good lunch.